Hello, friend. If your mind is still turning tonight, going back over something someone said, circling an argument you never got to finish, replaying the same worry until the edges of it are worn smooth, you're not doing anything wrong. You haven't failed at resting. You've just carried something into the dark that hasn't found anywhere to put itself down yet. So tonight, we're not going to ask you to breathe a certain way, or count anything, or try harder to feel calm. We're simply going to sit for a while with a very old prayer. Words written long ago by a man lying awake for reasons that might sound more familiar to you than you'd expect. People had been saying things about him, untrue things, and he could not, for the life of him, stop hearing them. Maybe you know that feeling better than you'd like to admit, lying here while some version of a conversation keeps replaying, uninvited, long after it actually ended. He found his way through it anyway, not by winning the argument, not by staying up all night defending himself in his head. He found a door out of it, and by the end, he was asleep, genuinely and completely, in a way he hadn't been in days. We're going to walk through that door with him tonight, slowly, with nowhere else we need to be. Let yourself sink, just slightly, into wherever you're lying. Let your hands go loose. Let your eyelids feel heavier than they did a minute ago. There's nothing waiting on the other side of them that needs you awake. Notice, if you can, the small sounds around you. A fan, a car somewhere far off, the particular quiet of your own room at this hour. You don't need to do anything with these sounds. Just let them be there, soft edges around you, while we go somewhere else for a while. There's no right way to feel right now. Whatever's underneath the racing thoughts, frustration, hurt, exhaustion, even a strange kind of loneliness that comes from having no one to say all of this to. It's allowed to be here too. Nothing needs to be resolved before we continue. Somewhere else is a long way back. A camp at the edge of a dry hill country, the air gone cool the way desert air does once the sun is fully down. Low tents scattered across a slope, banked fires burned down to orange coals, the shapes of sleeping animals darker than the ground around them. A cluster of tents, dark against a sky so full of stars it looks almost crowded, the kind of sky you only see far from anywhere bright. And in one of those tents, a lamp still burning, because the man inside it cannot make himself lie down. Let's go and sit with him. His name was David, though for tonight his name matters less than what's keeping him awake. Because what's keeping him awake, you already know intimately. Earlier that day, words had been said about him, not shouted in his face. That would have almost been easier, something he could have answered directly, out loud, in front of witnesses. These were the other kind, said behind hands, passed along at wells and gateways, the kind of words that reach you third hand and already twisted, so that by the time they arrive, you can't even locate exactly who started them or prove exactly what was meant. People he had led, people who had eaten at his table, now speaking of him as though his name were something to be ashamed of. He kept coming back to one face in particular, someone he had trusted for years, who hadn't said a word in his defense, who had simply looked away when the accusation was repeated, as if silence were the safest place in the room to stand. That had hurt worse, somehow, than the lie itself. Not the words, but the quiet way an entire room could decide something together without a single person actually having to say it out loud. Not everyone had joined in. He made himself remember that too, deliberately, because the mind at this hour has a cruel habit of collecting only the worst voices and forgetting the rest of the room. There had been a few, not many, but a few, who had simply refused to repeat what they didn't know to be true, who had looked at him the same way they always had, unchanged, uninterested in the story everyone else seemed so hungry for. He hadn't thanked them properly. He hadn't even really noticed them in the moment, over the noise of the ones who hadn't stayed steady. He noticed them now, lying in the dark, and found that this noticing was its own small kind of comfort. proof that the whole world hadn't turned against him, even if it had felt that way standing in the middle of it. And the terrible thing about that kind of talk is how it keeps working on you long after the room has emptied. David lay on his mat that night, turning it over and over. A whole silent courtroom convened in his own skull, where he was, by turns, the accused, the furious witness, and the exhausted judge, hearing the same case for the 100th time, and never once reaching a verdict that let him rest. He could hear, if he let himself, exactly how each person had said it. He could feel still exactly where it had landed. You know this particular kind of tired, the tired that has nothing to do with your body. Outside, the sheep shifted somewhere in the dark, and a dog somewhere further off answered another dog, and none of it touched the noise going on inside him. His body, at least, knew what it wanted. His shoulders ached with the particular heaviness of a day that had gone on too long. His eyes stung when he closed them. Every part of him below the neck was ready, more than ready, for sleep. And yet something above the neck kept refusing to let go, running the same argument in circles, as though staying awake and alert might somehow undo what had already been said and could not be unsaid. He sat up finally, unable to lie still any longer, and pushed the tent flap aside to step out into the cool air. The camp was almost entirely asleep around him. Dark shapes of tents, the low shape of the hillside against a sky gone impossibly deep. He stood there barefoot on the cool ground for a long while, and let the size of the sky do what it always did to him, made his particular trouble feel, for just a moment, smaller than it had felt inside the tent. Not unimportant, just smaller. One thing, among a great many other things, quietly continuing on out there, unbothered, the way they had every night before this one, and would every night after it. He found himself doing the thing he always did out here, without quite deciding to. Counting stars he already knew he couldn't finish counting, and finding somehow that the not finishing was the point. After a while he went back in. At some point, and he could not have told you exactly when, David stopped arguing with the voices in his memory and simply spoke, quietly, into the dark of the tent. The way you speak when you finally run out of other people to convince. "Hear me," he said, not to the ones who had wronged him, to the only one left who hadn't yet had a chance to answer. He didn't ask that night for the people to be punished, or for his name to be cleared by morning, or for the story to be set right in front of everyone who'd heard the wrong version. He asked instead for room. Room to breathe. Room to exist as himself again, apart from what was being said about him. He let his mind go back, deliberately this time, to a night far worse than this one. Years before, when he'd been younger, with far less to lose, and somehow far more reason to be afraid. Hunted then, not by rumor, but by men who genuinely meant to end him. He remembered a particular cave, deep enough that the entrance had become a small coin of gray light behind him, and how he'd sat in that darkness, certain, entirely certain, that this was where the story ended. And yet, he was here now, years later, an older man's worries keeping him up over an older man's problems, which meant, however he looked at it, that the cave had not, in fact, been the end. Something had made room for him even there, in a hiding place he'd been sure was a grave. He hadn't understood it then. He wasn't certain he understood it now, but he could see the shape of it, looking back. A pattern of being kept, again and again, in situations that had looked, from the inside, entirely unsurvivable. This felt smaller than the cave. He let himself admit that plainly, almost smiling in the dark at the thought. Words weren't swords. Rumor wasn't an army. And if room had been made for him in the actual narrow places, the ones with real edges, real cold stone, real men with real blades, then surely there was room enough in this one too, made of nothing but other people's mouths. Something in his chest loosened. Not all at once, just slightly, the way a held breath finally lets go. But the voices didn't leave entirely. They rarely do on the first try. He lay there and heard them again. How long, he thought, will people keep doing this? How long will they keep trading in things that aren't true? Keep chasing whatever makes them feel bigger at someone else's expense? Keep loving the version of the story that isn't real, because the real one is so much less interesting? He didn't have an answer for how long. Nobody ever does. That's the part that keeps a person up. Not the wrong itself, but not knowing when it ends. So he let that question go too, the way you let go of a rope when you finally understand pulling on it isn't bringing the other end any closer. And in the space that opened up when he stopped pulling, something quieter arrived. A thought, or maybe more than a thought, a kind of knowing, settling over him the way dust settles once the wind has finally stopped. He remembered that he had not, in fact, been abandoned to their version of him. That there was a way of belonging that had nothing to do with what anyone else believed about him that week. A belonging quieter than being admired, steadier than being proven right in front of a crowd. He hadn't needed to earn it. He hadn't needed to win anything to have it. It had been true of him before any of this started, and it would go on being true long after everyone had forgotten what they'd said and why. It occurred to him, lying there, that being fully known was a stranger comfort than being fully believed. Belief could be argued out of people, talked away, poisoned by one more rumor passed at one more gateway. But being known, actually known, every ordinary failure and unremarkable virtue of an entire life laid open to view, that couldn't be talked out of anyone because it had never depended on anyone's opinion to begin with. It simply was. It had been true on his best days, and it was true tonight, on a night that felt, from the inside, like one of his worst. He spoke again, quieter this time, and it wasn't a demand anymore. It was closer to a hand reaching out in the dark for something it already half believed was there. He was answered, though not with words, not with a voice from the sky splitting the tent open. He was answered the way you're sometimes answered, with a stillness that has weight to it, that you can actually feel arrive, settling into a room like a person quietly sitting down beside you. David lay very still for a long while after that. Not the tense stillness of someone braced against more bad news, a looser kind. He noticed his own heartbeat for the first time all night, and it wasn't racing anymore. There's a strange kind of courage, he thought, in simply lying still and letting your own heart say what it actually thinks, instead of letting the loudest voice from earlier keep narrating the whole night. Stay quiet long enough, and you find out what you actually believe about yourself, underneath what everyone else has been saying. He lay on his mat and did exactly that. Asked his own heart, honestly, whether the accusations were true. And in the dark, without an audience, without anyone left to perform his innocence for, he found that his answer was steady. He knew who he was. He had not done what they said. And knowing that quietly to himself in the dark turned out to matter more than being believed by a whole camp of people who'd already decided. And there, in the honesty of that stillness, he found something else waiting that he hadn't expected. He'd assumed earlier in the night that what he wanted was justice, a clear reckoning, their names dragged the way his had been, morning coming with everyone finally sorry. But sitting with his own honest heart, he found that wanting had already softened into something else. He didn't, in the end, want them to suffer for it. He simply wanted to be done carrying it, wanted his hands empty of it, so there'd be room for something lighter. There was a particular kind of relief, too, in admitting he didn't actually need to control how any of it ended. He had spent hours already that night rehearsing arguments, planning exactly what he'd say if he ever got the chance to set the record straight in front of everyone who'd heard the wrong version. And every rehearsal had left him more awake, not less. He let that plan go as well, gently, the way you set down something heavy you'd forgotten you were still holding. If the truth needed to come out, it would find its own way out, in its own time, and no amount of rehearsing in the dark was going to make that morning arrive any sooner. His only job tonight, it turned out, was the small one of finally putting it down. Isn't it strange, he thought, how much energy we spend trying to be understood by people who've made up their minds not to understand us, when the only understanding that actually lets you sleep is the kind you give yourself, honestly, in the dark, and the kind that comes from the one who already knows the whole truth of you anyway. He let go, then, of needing to defend himself before morning. Whatever needed proving could be proved another day, or it might never need proving at all. Some things simply outlast the people who doubted them, quietly, without a single argument ever being won out loud. Tonight wasn't for winning anything. Tonight was only for putting it down. He thought, too, about the others. The ones out there right now, he imagined, still awake somewhere in the dark, chasing after whatever they thought would finally make them feel secure. More grain in the storehouse, more approval, more proof gathered up and stacked like stones that they were safe. He understood the impulse. He'd felt it himself for years, that hunger to gather enough of something, money, reputation, certainty, that nothing could ever touch him again. But lying there that night, stripped of his reputation for the moment, having nothing gathered up to protect him at all, he felt something he hadn't expected, a kind of gladness that didn't depend on any of it. It hadn't come from having more than his accusers. It had come from having simply this: a quiet tent, a small flame, and the sense that he was held by something steadier than other people's opinions of him. It was a strange kind of wealth. He couldn't have explained it to anyone who hadn't lain awake the way he just had. The lamp beside him had burned low, its light gone small and gold, throwing soft shadows up the tent wall instead of hard ones. He watched it a while, the little flame leaning and settling, and found that his own thoughts had started doing the same thing, leaning towards sleep and settling instead of racing. He didn't decide to stop being afraid. Fear like that doesn't switch off on command. He simply noticed at some point that the fear had quietly stepped aside to let something larger stand in the room instead, and that this larger thing had, apparently, been there the entire time, waiting for him to stop shouting long enough to see it. I will lie down now, he thought, and it wasn't resignation. It was, for the first time all night, a choice. Not because the danger was gone, not because the people who'd wronged him had suddenly changed their minds, or the whole matter had resolved itself while he wasn't looking. He lay down simply because he had finally remembered, really remembered, not just recited, that he had never once in all his life been the one keeping himself safe through the night. Someone else had always been doing that. He had just, for a while today, forgotten to notice. Somewhere across the camp, someone coughed in their sleep and settled again. A sheep shifted its weight against another sheep. The ordinary, unhurried business of an entire small world continuing on through the night, entirely unaware of the trial that had been running for hours in one particular tent. And there was something oddly comforting in that too. His pain, real as it was not the only thing happening in the world tonight. The world had gone on holding its ordinary shape around him the whole time, patient, indifferent to his private courtroom, waiting simply for him to notice it was still there. David closed his eyes. The lamp burned on a little longer, low and steady, throwing its last warm light across a face that had, finally, gone slack and unguarded. And then, at some point neither of us will ever know exactly, the flame guttered small and went out on its own, and the tent went dark. And then, so gradually he never felt it happen. Gray. The first thin edge of morning finding its way in under the tent flap, touching the woven mat, touching his still, sleeping face, long before any bird outside had thought to announce it. He never felt the night end. He was simply, at some point, on the other side of it, having slept the whole way through. Maybe none of what kept you awake tonight looks anything like David's tent, or his accusers, or his particular kind of unfair. But I'd guess some of what happened in that tent feels closer to home than a story that old has any right to feel. Maybe your own version of the people at the gate isn't a crowd of gossiping neighbors. Maybe it's a version of yourself that shows up right around this hour, the one who replays the meeting, the message you sent, the thing you said too sharply or didn't say at all. Maybe it's an old argument with someone who isn't even in the room anymore, one you keep having anyway, out of habit, because some part of you still hasn't been allowed to rest its case. Maybe it was something smaller today. A comment left unanswered, a look you can't stop replaying, a text that didn't land the way you meant it to. Maybe it's bigger than that, a friendship that quietly ended without either of you saying why, a family gathering where you felt like the only one who remembered things a certain way, a version of you that got left behind in someone else's story and never got the chance to correct the record. Whatever size it is, it can feel enormous at this hour, in the dark, with nothing else competing for your attention. That's not a flaw in you. That's just what the middle of the night does. It turns the volume up on anything you haven't put down yet. And maybe, if we're honest, some of what's keeping you up tonight isn't really about anyone else at all. Maybe you're your own harshest accuser, running through your own list of failures, your own case against yourself, more thorough and more merciless than anyone else could ever manage. If that's true tonight, the same invitation still holds. Lie still. Ask your own heart, honestly, what it actually knows. Not the worst version of the story, the one exhaustion always reaches for first, but the true one. You are allowed to be unfinished. You are allowed to have gotten things wrong today and still be worth this rest. You are not on trial tonight. Whatever verdict you're afraid of, waking or sleeping, it can wait for daylight. And even then, it may matter far less than it feels like it does right now, at this hour, in this particular dark. Whatever it is tonight, you don't have to win it before you're allowed to sleep. You don't have to finish defending yourself. You don't have to reach a verdict. You're invited instead to do the smaller, stranger thing David did. To just lie still for a moment and ask your own heart, honestly and without an audience, what it actually knows to be true. Not what the loudest voice said, not what you're afraid people think, what you know. And then, having asked, to let the rest of it go. Not because it doesn't matter, but because tonight is not the night it needs solving. You have survived nights like this before, too. You just might not have kept count. Nights that felt, at the time, like they might not end. Like the particular trouble you were carrying was too large to fit inside a single life. And yet here you are, on the other side of every single one of them, breathing, listening to this, having made it through without exception so far. That's not nothing. That's not luck, repeating itself indefinitely by accident. Whatever kept you through those nights is available to you again tonight, in this exact worry, whatever it is. You don't have to remember the details of how it worked before. You only have to notice that it did. You are not required to keep yourself safe through the hours ahead. You were never actually required to do that. Not once, not any night of your life. You only sometimes forgot there was someone else already doing it. There is room for you tonight. There has always been room for you. Whatever narrow place today puts you in, it is not the whole shape of your life, and it will not be the last word. Let the gladness that doesn't depend on anything be enough for tonight. Not the gladness of having won or been proven right, or gathered enough to feel secure, but the older, steadier kind. The kind that was there before any of today happened, and will still be there tomorrow, whatever tomorrow decides to say about you. Lie down now. Let your case rest, unfinished, until morning. It will keep. Let the voices from today fade the way David's little fire did, low and gold, and then, gently, out. You are not staying up to guard yourself tonight. That was never actually your job, even on the nights it felt like it. Something steadier than you is doing that now, the way it always has, whether you noticed it or not. So rest, truly rest. Let your breath slow on its own, without being told to. Let your thoughts go quiet, one by one, like small flames settling for the night. There is nowhere else you need to be right now, and nothing else you need to solve. Just this mat, this dark, this slow settling toward sleep. You are held. You are kept. And you are, at last, completely, finally, free to sleep. Good night.